Today, I'm excited to join Dr. Mary Claire Race, Chief Innovation and Product Officer at Lee Heck Harrison. Mary Claire, please take it away.
Thank you, Francine, and hello, everyone. Discussion with you all today. I'm joining you from Zurich, where I'm on a business trip for the first time in 18 months. I'm very excited about that, and hence why you see a velvet curtain behind me. I'm in my hotel room, and sorry to anyone who might have joined and thought I was going to perform some type of live theatre or live music, but we'll see how we go. Maybe if we've got some time at the end. But in Zurich today, normally I'm based in Dublin, in Ireland, and would love to know where all of you're from. So let's try out this chat function, which should be bursting up on the screen now for you to type into. Just would love to hear what city or what location you're joining us from today, just while we get a hang of the various tools that we've got to use. So who's going to go in there first? I don't see anyone popping in yet. Give you another second or so just to tell us. There's Maura joining from DC, from Canada, from Philly, from Texas. Lots of my favorite places. I used to be based in New York up until very recently when COVID inadvertently relocated me. So nice to see you all from that side of the Atlantic. Miami, Atlanta, Windermere. Fantastic. Well, welcome all of you. And as I said, very much looking forward to the discussion that we're going to be having today. What we're going to be talking about today is really a movement that is sweeping organizations. And it's a movement that recognizes that the workforce of the future is built on a new ROI, and one that sees the skills that we all have as incredibly flexible and a really renewable asset, versus one that and requires talent to be replaced on a continual basis. But before we get into talking about that movement, let us first of all spend a little bit of time thinking about what has helped bring about this movement, and you know, this shift in how we're thinking about our talent. And really, if you think about it, the last few years, and particularly the last 18 months, has created this perfect storm. I would say even before the onset of COVID, but then COVID has really accelerated that. We have been grappling with things like the ongoing pace of change brought about by the fourth industrial revolution, demographic shifts in our workforce. Never before have we had so many different generations all coming together at work, about what work and career means to us. Like, how many of us in the last year ask questions about the role that work plays in our life and where we do it and what it looks like. And then when you layer on top of that everything that the pandemic brought last year, not just the physical health challenges, but also some of the mental health challenges that came alongside that, and all of the social unrest of 2020, you can see that we are facing into a brave new world when it comes to thinking about the talent that we have within our organizations. And let me elaborate on this a little bit further, and a couple of the trends that we're seeing that bring this to life. And firstly, I would say, you know, this idea, or this, I suppose the expectations that we had of work really have changed. Certainly, I know when I was entering the world of work, it was all about finding a job that offered security and that offered, you know, a good wage. But now we see that a lot of the younger generations entering the world of work, they're looking for something else. They're looking for an organization that has got good corporate social responsibility, that has a clear purpose, and where they are going to have lots of growth opportunities. So different decision making criteria when it comes to deciding where we work. And then, you know, this idea that the digital transformation and the pace of change when it comes to technology is creating a bit of a mismatch between the skills that we have in the workforce today, and then the jobs that are going to be needed tomorrow. And with that, and how much of that is real versus perceived, in some ways it doesn't matter, because it's about that fear and uncertainty that it's bringing. And it's all really falling on one group. And I know many of you on this joining us today are part of this group. It is falling on HR, and the challenges that we're faced as a HR industry now are more pressing than ever. It's no longer about workforce being numbers only. It's really about holding all of that together. This challenge that's facing people, their families, the whole of society, and how they're being affected in a very different way. And we have a quote here about just, the concern and worry that we have when we think about that, workforce. And really, it's not an imaginary challenge, or it's not something I think that we're overegging, because there is a real ripple effect of some of these typical workforce decisions that we've been making, or that that companies choose to make, particularly when it comes to layoffs. So again, this slide showing that even for employees who stay in an organization after a series of job cuts, there's a 41% decline in job satisfaction and a 20% decline in job performance. And that's often something that we see in the work that we do at LHH. It's what do we do with those people who are left and have to continue on in the organization. We've touched on this a little bit already, but again, this notion that there's an unpreparedness in the workforce. So a sense of, what I do today is going to change tomorrow, and I just don't know if I've got the right skills and the right set of experiences to be able to thrive in that new world. Then this sense of people really feeling overlooked. And again, I think this was something that really came to the fore last year. And the consequences of this has been, mass resignations, people just feeling that they're no longer engaged with the work that they're doing. And if they had the opportunity, again, in this study, half of millennials reporting that they would leave their job for a better opportunity if they could. And this is very tied to career development, because often it's about not being able to see the opportunity versus there not necessarily being an opportunity there. And again, remember my earlier point, this is what people are looking for now when they choose a career. So, we need to make sure that we're providing it. And then the final piece, I guess, is accountability. And again, in this particular study, only 30% of companies surveyed talked about being satisfied with the degree to which their managers and their leaders were holding we're managing accountability. And again, if you think about the fact that your frontline leaders are the people who are responsible for the largest percentage of your workforce, that's quite worrying. So you have this situation of a workforce that is burnt out, disengaged, unprepared, overlooked, and in many cases unaccountable, languishing in roles and craving something different. So that's the picture. That's what we're facing into. We'd love to hear just how this is kind of resonating with you. And we have a little poll question here again, just to get some feedback from you and some interaction. And the question is, just with all of that I just talked through, to what extent are you considering some of these challenges in your organization? So is it not really something you've thought about at all? Are you thinking about it somewhat? Or is it a big concern, this situation that we're facing into? So you should be able to select one of these questions and then one of these answers, and then we'll see how it's shaping up across the group. Okay, a third of you have, this is really good because I can see how many people have responded. So a third of you have answered. We're edging up towards half of you. So let's give you another few seconds. Okay, another 5 seconds if you haven't had a chance to answer that. And we will see how the results shape up. So let us flick ahead. Last couple of seconds, get your answers in. A few more people. Fantastic. Okay, so over half of you saying it's a big concern, and then most of the rest of you thinking that this is somewhat of a concern. So on the whole, most folks thinking this is a consideration that you are grappling with right now. And that really leads me on to our next piece. we went through about 4 there. And I would love to just hear a little bit about, what other drivers, what other trends are influencing now. So maybe it's something that we haven't touched on in that opening section. And if you want to just pop that into the chat function. So what other things are on your mind right now when it comes to thinking about your workforce? Okay, and whilst you're thinking of that, Francine, I'll maybe open it up to you. Like what sorts of things come to mind when you think about all of those different factors that are impacting the talent today and the workforce today? Oh, Francine, I don't know if you can hear me. Are you muted, Francine? No, I can't hear you. Oh, well, don't worry, Francine. I think there's a slight challenge with your audio because I can't. Oh, there we go. Now I can hear you.
Okay, great. So what, can you hear me? Good. So what I'm very curious about, Mary Claire, and I'm seeing this in the chat as well, is just the factor around engagement. That was the question that I was going to ask you about. With so many things happening in the workplace and everyone, working in these virtual workspaces, quasi coming to work off different schedules, etc. How is engagement showing up? Is that something that the survey looked at, or that you've seen or heard about in this body of work?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Francine. And actually, our LHH, our parent company, is the Adecco Group based here in Switzerland, and we've just finished some very interesting research that we will be publishing next month. And engagement came out as a really strong theme in that it's at its lowest ever. So really the sense of people having survived this very difficult 18 months and maybe just thinking, there must be more to it than this, or my job, it's just not really doing it for me anymore. I don't feel motivated. I think already I see in the chat some of the solutions to this. So there was a comment I saw about, using learning and development as an enabler. So to really focus on people's skills. And what I think is quite interesting is that a lot of people during the pandemic, and particularly during times of lockdown, choose to invest in their own skill development themselves. I know I certainly took a few classes in the evenings just to keep myself busy. And I think there's a real opportunity there for organizations to harness that. So how do you use learning as an opportunity to re-engage people? I also saw some comments about how do you keep the importance rather of keeping the personal connection, and for managers maybe to be checking in a different way than how they've been doing up until this point. So a really important factor there. Also, sorry, go ahead, Francine. Yeah.
No, so the other key that, and going back to some of your earlier slides, Mary Claire, where you spoke about the management and the leadership. And as you know, this is an imperative in terms of them actually figuring out how do they navigate themselves in this world, in space, in terms of capacity and capabilities and, all of the good things that they need to be able to successfully navigate in the new, the new work world. So are there any, bodies of work or anything that you or your organization are doing to really enable the leader?
Yeah, absolutely, Francine. Again, a great question. And I think, the pandemic, I think, shone a light on where maybe there was leadership populations, but again, I don't think anyone had ever had to lead through this type of situation before.
Correct.
And how much support were we giving them? Again, a lot of research coming out to show that in the last year it's become more important than ever for leaders to be possessing skills such as emotionally, empathy, being able to connect with people. And that is much more important perhaps than some of the other more traditional leadership competencies. Now, again, you could argue that there's nothing new there, but I think that last year finally really brought to the fore just how critical that is. And we'll be coming later on in this presentation to talk a little bit about the role of the leader in making this shift in the workplace. So maybe we'll move on to that now, Francine. And I know we can come back to some of the questions that are coming through.
Great.
When we get to the Q&A. I think we have talked about these themes, definitely resonating with some of the comments coming through, but everything really is changing. This idea of having a linear career is very much a thing of the past, and you've got this situation where people are thriving in ways that seemed maybe brave and risky just a few years ago, and then on the other hand, you're also seeing the skill shift leaving others behind. So it's a time of immense change, and it's a time where we really need to be thinking about our people and the return on our people in a different way. So we think in the wake of this perfect storm, or perhaps we're still in the midst of it, it's time to rethink what this looks like. A quote here from Alan Wilde, who is a collaborator of LHH, and he talks about, we can no longer offer someone a career for life, but we really need to be demonstrating that we care about employees' lifetime careers. So what does that look like? It's a shift, really, I would say, on multiple levels. And it's a shift from thinking about our talent or our people as replaceable to thinking of them as a renewable energy source, almost a renewable workforce. And again, this is this shift away from seeing people as, okay, once they no longer have the skills or they can carry out the tasks that I need them to do, I'm going to replace them. About them as something that can be invested in for change, and seeing the opportunity that's in the existing workforce. But again, like I said, this is a big mindset shift, and it requires, I suppose, change on multiple different levels. There should be a few little animations here, hopefully, that will come up. And apologies, because I know there's quite a lot of detail on this slide. But when we talk about a replaceable approach to talent, I suppose it is that simultaneous firing and hiring. It's, we preserve coaching and development for just a few people in the organization. We don't really have, our finger on the pulse of what's going on for our people or have that insight into what really makes them tick. We often suffer damage to our brand because of the way we do treat people or the way that we use them. And the more renewable approach is, again, like I said, it's seeing the workforce as something to invest in. It's seeing people as having the potential to constantly reinvent themselves, to learn new skills, to move into different roles within the organization. And just because their skills become obsolete in one area, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the end of the road for them in that particular organization. I would say to folks on the webinar, we are going to be sharing these slides afterwards, so don't feel you have to take down all of this detail. You will have that afterwards. And all of this, I guess, building towards this idea of a new ROI, which is a return on individuals. So we feel that this is a more powerful way to be thinking about our people. And a lot of the work we do at LHH is helping companies to re-energize their workforce and to realize their true potential in a way that they haven't done before. And the payoffs there are huge. And I know a lot of folks in the webinar will definitely agree with this. But again, just to recap, first of all, the savings that you can realize from reskilling someone and redeploying them into something new versus just laying them off and then having to hire someone else. Equally with coaching, that productivity that can come in an organization where you really embrace that approach to learning and have a coaching environment, whether that's through traditional coaching methods or by equipping your leaders to be coaches in themselves. And then the other piece as well is about the productivity. And again, we all know this, but it's worth recapping the productivity that comes from engaged employees and the increase that we can see in terms of dollar amount where an organization prioritizes learning and development. Again, you can see from this figure here on the right of the screen, it's double return on investment in terms of where you prioritize that approach to learning and development. And so again, what we're talking about here is seeing that every person has got potential and that they have got potential to change, they've got potential to grow, and they can thrive through all of the different things that their career throws at them. So let me pause there, Francine. Let's see if you've got any questions before we move on to that.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of questions, Mary Claire, in the chat here. And one that I found very interesting was around, and I believe this is from Jennifer, and she's asking about the ability to have this renewable play be more effective in smaller companies versus larger companies. And are smaller companies more agile to be able to do this versus, say, your larger organizations?
I think there's probably pros and cons to that because yes, I think smaller organizations, more nimble, more agile, more able to embrace this approach. But then I do think a bigger organization brings with it more opportunities for people and more opportunities for people to move departments, to move countries, to learn new skills. So I think it can, and actually the clients that we're working with in the space tend to be larger organizations. But yes, I do think, a smaller organization, you might be able to pick it up and run with it a lot more quickly. I would also say a really important determining factor of how successful this is the culture and the degree to which you're able to embrace a learning culture and have a leadership team that believes in the potential of people. And obviously in a smaller organization, that might be a little bit easier to influence.
Yes. So back to, just within the organization, Frank has brought up an interesting question around what tools and support are you or your organization, recommending or sharing or providing with managers as they learn how to manage like this hybrid, workforce? And, how are you teaching them or how do you recommend that, they be taught in terms of accountability, because they're accountable for this as well, not just the workforce. So any thoughts that you could share or any, experiences that you've had thus far with this work and the companies that you're consulting with?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, our next section is really to delve into a little bit more detail around the how of executing all of this. But I would say, I mean, we work with leaders in a whole array of different skill areas, but particularly as it pertains to this, I think there is something very important about leaders seeing that, talent is not something to kind of try and protect and hold on to and preserve for yourself. And there's a need to be really generous with talent. And, if you have someone in your team who maybe is feeling disengaged or is languishing a little bit and craving something more, surely it's better to encourage them to, perhaps learn some new skills and move elsewhere in the organization than hang on to them only for 6 months later for them to walk out the door to one of your competitors. Now, that does require a different mindset and a different approach from leaders. It requires them to be collaborating a lot more as a cohort for the good of the organization rather than just to achieve their individual goals. I think another big piece, and we have been developing approaches specifically around this, is how do you nurture a growth mindset in leaders? And again, there's mixed research around whether someone can learn to have a growth mindset or whether we're born with either a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. I'm a big believer that we can learn it. But again, this is something that I think is often important with leaders, that you're equipping them with that so that they truly do believe every human has got the potential to grow and develop.
Now, Mary Claire, also I see that there are some questions around just in terms of when you mentioned, that there are individuals, leaders, employees, et cetera, that really need to have this continuous, growth mindset. Now, when you think about certain industries, do you see that to be, more true versus others that are more traditional, workforces, or, the products and services that they bring are more traditional versus your more high tech organizations, innovative type organizations? Do you see a difference in the mindset of this renewable, employee that you're speaking of?
To an extent, but I actually think, Francine, what we've seen a little bit more is there's certain industries where this is a more pressing challenge for them. So I would say, like the automotive industry, for instance, if you think about how the technology behind cars has changed even in the last 5 to 10 years, and what that has meant for perhaps a mismatch in skills in that industry. I think there's industries like that are it's more of a pressing, urgent need that they approach this differently, versus it being perhaps organizations that are smaller or more innovative. Again, I would come back to culture, and I think even some of the a more traditional organization that's got the right culture will be more readily adopting this approach than perhaps a small entrepreneurial organization that's full of leaders with quite fixed views of people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And do you see any, in terms of, it's a big task to shift a culture, as you know, within any organization, large or small. Do you have any thoughts? Because I see some questions around, how do you actually impact the culture? How do you actually start to shift it? Who is truly who are the stewards of the culture, if you will, around that? And it seems like this is a key factor that needs to be addressed even prior to thinking about, or I'd like to hear your opinion in terms of, thinking about this renewable, mindset. Any advice, any tips that you would have for the audience around really thinking about the culture and how to start that journey? Because it is a journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not an overnight one, Francine. It's one that takes time, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I would say, like any culture change initiative, it's got to be very much at every part of the organization. What's interesting, when we were building a technology platform that enables individuals to find opportunities elsewhere in their organization, that enable them to match their skills now and in the future with future roles, and we've done some really cool stuff around that. But we've also had to put quite a bit of investment in how do we support HR in an organization to encourage this mindset to, when it comes to your talent acquisition team sourcing roles, how do we help them to be thinking in the right way? For leaders, we've talked a lot about leaders already. What are we doing with them so that they embrace this mindset? And then also for individuals themselves, like how are we encouraging people to be lifelong learners in everything that they do? And again, it's not a quick, one and done. We certainly have a lot of products which might be workshops or training and to facilitate some of that, but it really does need to be that whole organization approach. And again, starting with the senior leadership, they have to walk the talk.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One more question that I thought that was very interesting as we talk about HR and around the fact, performance management. We talk a lot about that in the HR community. So there's a question from Shawanda that asks, how do you assess performance management differently when you are focused on renewing talent, skill building, flexing? How do you, how to leverage talent? Any thoughts about that, Mary Claire? Because that's very important.
Yeah. So I think, and just make sure I understand the question correctly, Francine. Mm-hmm. But so manage performance in this type of culture, like in a renewable.
Mm-hmm. Or how does it impact performance management? I should say, better stated, how does this impact in performance management?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think great question. I could talk for another hour about performance management and some of my frustrations with how we still do that. But it definitely requires a more modern approach to performance management, because I think if you're just measuring someone against their goals today and how they're achieving what what they're measured to do in their current role, you're certainly not going to be making space or encouraging them to learn new skills and to consider what a a future next step might be that looks completely different. So I think that definitely needs to be baked into how you set goals for the year, what priorities you set for the person, and then how that all gets, and again, it comes back to accountability, the degree to which leaders are then held to account on how they're managing that. Because again, I've seen lots of organizations where there's an aspiration towards managing this type of performance versus more traditional goal achievement. But then when it comes down to do that end of year review, the conversation's all about what did you achieve this year versus what did you learn this year. So I think that's really important.
Okay. Great.
So Francie, let me move on to this next section because here I really want to bring to life how to execute on this new talent strategy to create a renewable workforce. And then we can come back again in a few slides for a good section of Q&A. And really, when I think about where do you start with this, I would say that it's really about thinking about the investments that you're making in your talent. And it's not about investing more, but it's about investing differently. And with this approach, we can now view an existing workforce as a source of talent acquisition and shift to this continuous renewal model that actually saves you cost, both in terms of having to go out and hire new talent but also lost productivity, engagement, which we talked about, and it shifts the way your workforce sees you as an employer and enables them to grow and to thrive and of deep satisfaction where you get full potential from them. So it's it really I can't emphasize enough how much of that shift in mindset is needed. We talk about here the liquid workforce mindset, which I love, and this idea that it's a really flexible, fluid source of huge talent that we can leverage. And then at the same time, for individuals as well, it requires a shift. And this is a shift in a number of different ways. So, where they might be just wait and enroll for either a payoff or, and maybe not even wait and enroll for a future payoff. They've maybe just plateaued and they're just riding out their career versus taking a much more proactive approach to their learning. It might be, right now where they don't understand the skill gaps and how to close them, and they just feel this sense of anxiety about not being fit for the future versus having a really clear view of where they need to grow and what that could look like. Again, if I think about a more traditional, perhaps as we would call it, a replaceable culture, you often have individuals who work within their silos and they've got quite limited knowledge of the rest of the business versus people who are very diverse, they're multi-skilled, and they understand all parts of the business. Again, which would you prefer to have? A shift from being maybe risk averse, avoiding putting your head above the parapet, scared of the unknown, to being a champion of change, or even a change entrepreneur, someone who embraces change and who embraces the idea of reinvention. For anyone joining today who's like me, a child of the 80s, I often think Madonna would have been a great, poster of time she reinvented herself throughout her music career. Again, real champion of change or reinvention. And then finally, we've talked about this a lot, but moving from that fixed mindset around, this is what I am, this is what I studied, I can only ever be this, to seeing much more potential and being creative with that. I saw there was a question which caught my eye around, what if you have someone who maybe studied right to PhD level? Yes, I mean, it might be difficult for them to see how they could completely change into a different area, but maybe they can get creative with the application of that knowledge. And think about it in that way. So again, it's both on an organizational level and on an individual level. We want to be able to see this mindset shift occur. And again, as I said, HR has got a big part to play in this. Now, on these next few slides, what I'm going to share is a continuum, which again might be helpful for folks just to watch and to think about where your organization might be. And what this continuum shows is that investing differently in these solutions creates this compounding return, and even more so as you do over time. So let's start with, you're maybe in this replaceable approach to talent where, you tend to favor traditional outplacement, or maybe you don't offer outplacement at all. Your talent's modeled around hierarchical structures. Employees have to work their way up. It's, that kind of traditional linear career. And you're often filling new roles with external hires, with folks internally not seeing the opportunity to grow within the organization. As we move along then, we see where the organization structure is maybe fairly hierarchical, but employees do see some opportunity within that, and they're open to that. There's efforts to enhance the culture, to engage people, but it's not necessarily purposefully driven. And here we would talk about more, perhaps more progressive outplacement, or what we've referenced here is unstructured redeployment, where there perhaps is internal redeployment, but it's not done in a kind of organized way or encouraged to the workforce. And again, where development tends to be geared more to the leadership levels. Then as we get kind of midway along the spectrum, here there's awareness around developing internal mobility, a redeployment strategy to achieve your business outcomes. But again, it's not a very people-centric approach. It's a shift towards that, but it's not that full shift towards a people-centric culture. And you might see more discrete leadership development happening. You might see upskilling happening more regularly. Again, it tends to be quite business driven, and it hasn't really permeated the culture. And then not penultimately, as we get towards this part of the spectrum, it's where we see a true talent mobility organization start to emerge, where people come first. There's real belief and innovation around how we can move people, how we can invest in them, how we can develop the talent. And the organization sees a competitive advantage that this brings by harnessing the talent in this way. Again, this accountability word comes back in here. So managers are held accountable and are empowered to make decisions about their people in this way. And then finally, as we get to what we all strive towards, it's a talent mobility ecosystem. And when I talk about ecosystem, this could even be where there's partners or collaborators outside the organization that you're encouraging mobility with as well. And change is driven at the individual and the organizational level, as was shown on the previous slides. There's real transparency, there's real collaboration between different parts of the organization in terms of people's career paths, and development and learning and skill. It's really flourishing, and you can almost touch and feel it. These are the types of the organizations that those employees that we talked about right at the beginning of the presentation, this is where they want to go. This is where they want to be hired. And where, they see it just as an incredible place to spend that portion of their career and to learn from it. Yeah, go ahead, Francina.
Yes. So just a question, Mary Claire. When you work with organizations that say they have the aspiration to be at this renewable place, where, in terms of just, I think about this, is this a 5-year journey? Is this a 10-year journey? And I understand that, oftentimes it cannot be anchored because there's so many factors that happen. But as you talk to organizations and share with them what this looks like and the energy and time and effort that they will need to take, can you give a little more insight in terms of what organizations are looking at? Because even the organizations that are say in the redefinable stage, to get to this end state that you're talking about, give us some ideas of what that looks like, on a horizon, if you will.
End to end. Yeah. And I'm going to be really annoying and give you one of those answers, Francine, which is it depends.
It depends. I know, it depends.
I'm a psychologist by training, and I often think that's our go-to phrase. It depends. Yeah. And it does. It depends on a lot of variables. It depends on the starting point. So if you're starting from a very low base level where it's you're right at the other end, I would say that's not going to be that's not going to be a 1-year journey or even an 18-month, 2-year journey. It's probably going to take a little bit longer than that. It also depends on how willing and ready the organization is to change. Like, what are the circumstances around change? Is there an event, a restructure, a merger, something that creates that burning platform for change that you can kind of harness that moment? It depends on the level of sophistication and scale of perhaps your HR organization. Again, I think if you've got really sophisticated HR team that can be partners in this and really support particularly leaders to embrace this, then that can also be, a real accelerator on the journey. So it's difficult to say, it's 5 years from one to the other. We have an assessment, and we often work with organizations at the outset to really understand where are you, and then where do you want to get to? Because, some organizations are maybe thinking, well, if we could even get to durable, that would be a good place for us to be. Or in the short term, we at least want to move to this point. So that's often how we'll start our work with the client, is to understand and use that assessment to understand where they are.
Okay. And do you sometimes in your assessment feel that you have to upskill certain functions in order to be able to deliver upon this message, to engage the leadership or to engage the frontline manager or whomever, to get them ready, prior to going out and saying, hey, we're trying to really focus on this renewable workforce?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Francine. And it's something that we're really passionate about because, obviously our business is providing support around this sort of thing, but it has to be very targeted support. And I would say an organization needs to run with this themselves and needs to be able to build something that's lasting and sustainable. So upskilling from within is really important, and particularly around, again, I keep talking about the mindset, particularly around that mindset piece.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Now, I do have one question. Someone is asking you, Mary Claire, can you share which non-intrusive and most successful methods you have been you have seen implemented by organizations to understand the topics of interest of their employees?
Yes, and I see that's coming from Serge. Hi, Serge. I can't see you, but it's nice that you're on the webinar. Yes. And I think, my understanding of this question is that how do you understand where someone might be interested in terms of a future role or to develop future skills? Again, I think there's lots of ways that can be done. We have interest assessments. Certainly wouldn't be advocating for any of the, mining of data in a way that's unethical. But I think there is a lot of data that organizations often have about people's interests that they're not using. So that's something, again, that we're often looking at. I often think as well, there's, and this is built into some of the technology that we've developed, is, where there's a conversation between the manager and the employee, to be really forthcoming about that information and to see that, sharing that information is a great avenue for them to be able to explore future roles. The other piece that I'll throw in, we conducted some research earlier this year, with a partnership with the University of Zurich. And it was interesting just what came out of that around the degree to which we understand our own interests. Because are we interested in something at work because it's what we've always done, or it's what we were told we were interested in? So this is something that we're innovating on right now, is how do we help people to uncover interests that they might not even know yet, which to me is so exciting. I love the thought that I might be interested in something that I'm not even aware of. Isn't that so cool?
Oh, that is really cool. I'd love to know about me. So I have too many interests.
Yeah, so stay tuned on that one. But yes, great question, and I think that's a really important piece thinking about, is how do you capture that insight about. So Francine, let me share. I do have one case study that I wanted to share as a final slide, and then we can finish up with our last few minutes of Q&A.
Great.
And is a case study of Capital One. who we worked with over a number of years. And I'm actually just going to pull up all these builds. And again, apologies for the slightly text-heavy slide. But Capital One, there's a few things I'll call out here. So, they were looking to transform from being a, financial services company to one that was, much more technology driven, almost being seen as a technology company, whilst retaining and acquiring their top talent. So wanting to preserve the people, but really to shift how the organization was seen. A few things I'll call out here, and I won't go through all of the detail of the slide, but pertinent to what we were just talking about. They didn't do this overnight, but they did start with a mindset about how they wanted to support people's careers. So that was very clear from the outset that was a mindset they wanted to have. All of the various different initiatives, and there were a few, were integrated with that overall approach to career development and mobility. So different things didn't feel isolated. And again, having that real sense of it being part of one journey was important. Even when people transitioned externally, they were so accustomed to managing their careers that the success rates for placement in a new role outside the organization was extraordinarily high, as was their engagement in alumni activities and the whole kind of alumni sentiment. So they were still retaining that sense of, the brand and the culture with people who left, which is, was really powerful. And we did, we can talk about the ROI with them, and we have got statistics here on the slide, but for them, it was really about doing, and this is what I loved about it, it was about doing the right thing for their people, a more cost-effective way to think about their talent. And this also relates back to the piece we made earlier about how, there's no longer this distinction between work and life. We're like, we really need to be thinking about, people and society and community. When Capital One do make layoffs, they very often leave the organization with skills that they didn't have when they started, and they land well within their communities to go on to do something else. And again, that's something that they were really passionate about. Again, you'll see some of the statistics down there. We talk about 10 years. And again, back to your earlier question, Francine, I'm not saying that this type of shift takes 10 years, but that just shows you the commitment that this organization had made to approaching their talent in a different way. And again, all of the detail of this will be in the slide that folks will receive afterwards. So I think that's the end of the slide or the content part of the presentation, Francine. So I know we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left for some more Q&A. So yes. What have you got for me?
Well, time is flying here, and the chat is exploding here. But here's a question from Christina. She said, "Can you say more about the digital toolkit and tech college digital transformation?" That in relation, I'm assuming that's in relation to Capital One. Yeah, and again, yes. This was about this was about providing people with, using digital technology, providing them with the tools that they needed at their fingertips. And particularly, again, if you think about the world that we live in today and how on demand it is, that people felt they had that support around, what skills do I need? What skills do I have access to? Where can I find them within the organization? How can I source support for that? We built a toolkit that was very much putting all of that at their fingertips, and it was a dynamic and a living document. I'm getting a little bit of background noise there. And again, this is something that we've seen with lots of other organizations as well, is that need to give people the tools at the moment in time that they need it. Because again, we all know this is the world we live in now. We don't think, oh, well, I'll wait until, we pick up our phone and we expect to have the answer to what we're looking for. So that was an important part of that.
All right.
And also, Mary Claire, I see a question around in terms of where in the organization should initial effort to invest in talent improvement be directed. So, very interested to hear what was done with, or I would say in general, in organizations, in terms of where do they start? Do they start in the lower skilled areas and the higher levels within an organization? What's your counsel or experience with that in terms of this body of work?
So is the question about where, if you had to start somewhere, where would you start?
Yes. Yeah, if you had to
Yeah.
start somewhere and you had to invest because you have probably a finite pool of dollars and all the things that come along with it, resources, etc., where would you start?
I mean, I couldn't advocate enough for starting with your leadership population, because, you might not have the budget or the resources or even the technology to plug in some of the tools, but if you can get your leaders on board with thinking about their talent, their talent in a different way, even if you're not able to put front some of the infrastructure around this, then that's going to be a big leap forward. If you have a cohort of leaders who really believe that
Sure.
what someone is today doesn't necessarily define what they could be tomorrow, then you will be a good way along the journey. If I had a little bit more money to spend, or ideally I would tackle both at the same time, I would be wanting to think about the HR function within the organization, and how can you engage them as enablers of this. And again, if you think about where a lot of HR processes like talent acquisition, performance management, outplacement, where that all fits is within HR. And again, if you can harness that group to be thinking differently, even without a lot of the other parts of the solution, again, that will leapfrog you in the right direction.
Now, Mary Claire, do you have any recommendations for the audience here? As you talked about, a lot of this work is, it is a leadership imperative, and it is really important to start at the top in the organization. But what do you do, or how do you handle? I'm heading this way. When you have a leader, or you have the leadership team that is not engaged, but the workforce is engaged, the employees are engaged, but you can't kind of get over that hurdle with the executive level. How do you approach that, or any thoughts that you have around this?
Yeah, it's a really tough one. I mean, the first thing I would say is don't give up. Don't give up. It's a really tough nut to crack. Obviously, in an ideal world, we'd maybe wave a magic wand and they would either go away or they would completely change their mind overnight. But that's not how it works.
Sure.
I think, depending on what drives your executive team, there could be merit in just spelling out the business case here. I think that's what's fantastic about this is we have the research and the numbers to show that this is a more cost-effective way of managing your talent. And that was certainly, you'll see in the capital one, the detail of the capital, when we talk about ROI in the traditional sense, return on investment, the return on investment is very clear. So maybe that's a place to start, is, adopting this approach is really important. But I would say, you're probably not going to really get through to them without some proper culture work around adopting a growth mindset. But, is there someone in that group that you can harness as an advocate, that you can get on board? It might not be the CEO, but is there another person, or maybe at the next level down, C-1, is there someone or a number of people in that group that you can leverage to influence that group? But yeah, it's a tough one, and it's often the thing that we first say to clients is, are you really up for this, and is your executive team really up for it? Because otherwise, it's going to be tough.
Wow. Well, I'm looking here at the chat here. We have one more that I'd like to ask you, and this is just really around the individual, the employee. So the question that Rachel has is, what advice do you have on how much effort should we put into an individual to upskill and learn new skills in order to shift their roles versus letting them go?
Well, there's that saying, and I'm probably going to get it wrong because it's getting late here in Zurich, and you sometimes at the end of the day you can't remember the quotes, but it's something about, what if I invest in my team and they learn all these new skills and then they leave, and then the retort is, well, what if you don't? You know, like
Correct.
I think it's either you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because this is what people are crying out for now. Now, I would say like there's some decisions obviously made as to in terms of like what that investment, the first step around encouraging people to embrace a lifelong approach to learning, embrace a growth mindset, embrace the notion that they could develop new skills, and that's the first step, and that doesn't cost anything. And then obviously, each organization or each department is going to have to decide on how much they invest in that. But I really do think that you know you, this is what our workforce is now demanding. And
Hmm.
if you don't do it, someone else will.
Absolutely. Well, this was great. I know your time has come to an end and it's getting late in Zurich as well, as you said, Mary Claire. So thank you. This was wonderful. A great insight, great information. And to the audience, thank you. There were great questions.